समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
There were Nuke India signs at a United States church shootout, which is quite startling. India has never had anything to do with shootouts that have triggered America's own domestic debate on gun laws. But here it was, a Nuke India sign that leads many to wonder whether Trump and his MAGA base have now created a kind of racist anti-India environment in the backdrop of his tariff war. The war seems to be only escalating every day. Now we have seen a rather extraordinary outburst from Pete Navarro, key trade advisor to Donald Trump, this time describing Russia's invasion of Ukraine to be Modi's war. Speaking on American media, the anchor actually hits back and says, "You mean Putin's war?" And Navarro says, "No, I mean Modi's war." Where is this all headed? I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. On the program today, the signs that you see on your screen surfaced in the midst of a US shootout in Minneapolis. While there were other signs as well, including calls to kill Trump by the shooter, what was a Nuke India sign doing in the midst of this all? Has there now been an anti-India sentiment created with even H-1B visas under attack as Trump's tariff war worsens relationships between India and the United States of America? On the program today, we'll be asking where India can and should go from here. There are some who say that only a Modi and a Trump meeting can fix this. There are others who say that this is beyond repair at the level of the top two leaders because that's where, in fact, the friction is. Almost everybody in India, at least, believes that this has very little to do with the purchase of Russian oil. By the way, petroleum products are exempt from the 50% tariff, and the data, of course, speaks for itself. $15 billion in terms of oil imports from Europe vis-a-vis India. $3 billion is the value of America's own refined oil product imports from India. So this isn't about oil and it isn't about Russia. So what is it really about? Let me introduce our guests on the program today. This as global politics gets upended. Bloomberg is reporting a secret letter sent by Xi Jinping to President Murmu that began the process of rapprochement between India and China. The Prime Minister will be in China for the SCO summit in a few days from now. Joining us is Tavleen Singh, veteran author and columnist. Always a pleasure, Tavleen. Also joining us is Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar. On previous programs, he's been sanguine that the relationship can be saved. Can Navarro be ignored? Does he not speak for Trump? We'll find out from Ambassador Kumar in a moment. Suhasini Haider, who's of course one of India's foremost strategic minds, also the diplomatic editor at The Hindu, is with us. Always a pleasure. And military veteran Maj Gen Neeraj Bali is with us. General Bali, a great pleasure to see you. Before I get opening comments, I just want to play out an excerpt of what Pete Navarro said. This is now entering the realm of the absurd. The Russia invasion of Ukraine is now being called Modi's war. This is, I mean, for lack of a better word, bizarre. And, is Navarro saying this from ignorance? Is there a deliberate attempt to basically ratchet up sentiments? We actually don't know. Listen to Pete Navarro calling the Russia war Modi's war.
India buys Russian oil at a discount, and then Indian refiners in partnership in India with Russian refiners make that and sell it at a premium to the rest of the world, right? Russia uses the money it gets to fund its war machine, kill more Ukrainians, and then the next thing that happens, of course, is Ukraine comes to us and Europe and says, give us some more money. So everybody in America loses because of what India is doing. The consumers and businesses and everything lose, and workers lose because India's high tariffs cost us jobs and factories and income and higher wages. And then the taxpayers lose because we got to fund Modi's war, okay? The road to peace runs at least partly right through New Delhi.
War?
I mean Modi's
okay.
war.
Let me ask
because the road to peace runs in part through New Delhi. I mean, that's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
But there are some who say that we're...
Do you mean Putin's war? No, I mean Modi's war. The anchor, I think, looked a little bit gobsmacked there. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, I'll start with you. Are you still feeling like this can be salvaged? Because the comments out of the United States of America are now entering the realm of the absurd. There's another comment from a key White House official saying if India doesn't budge, nor will Trump. Okay, that can be located within normal sort of, who's going to blink first. But I mean, for Putin's invasion of Ukraine to now be called Modi's war is just extraordinary. Ambassador Kumar. Could we unmute? Sir, you're muted. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me on your show. No, I think the way it works now in Washington, D.C., at least as per my reading, is that the boss wants something and then all the ministers make statements to justify the position taken by Trump. That's what is going on. So if you point to a statement by Navarro, I could point to a statement by Scott Bessent, who said, in the end, we will come together. For every statement, the equal and opposite is true. I think the bottom line, Barkha, is that Trump is resetting the relationship. I think I had an opportunity to tell you this. I think the US, at least under Trump, will not see India as a counterweight to China. It is trying to do a grand bargain with China. That will mean that it looks at India relationship completely differently. I actually think that may be no bad thing because India-US should always stand on its own merit. Why should we be subject to the vagaries of the relationship between America and China? And also, in my view, it frees India up. It removes obstacles that India might otherwise have in its own relationship with China and Russia. So frankly, I wouldn't attach too much importance to Navarro's statement. I think what you are seeing is pre-negotiation tactics. A lot of pressure is being ratcheted upon India, as you rightly say. But I think we just have to stand firm and see where this goes. I said keep a stiff upper lip, and that's exactly what we should do, I think.
So you want India to be Michelle Obama-esque and say when they go low, we go high?
No, all I'm saying is, and I've said it openly, play all sides, play all your cards and play the long game. How much clearer can I be? The Prime Minister is going to China. It's good. Yeah. The Prime Minister is going to talk to Xi Jinping and Putin. That's very good. So play all sides, play the long game. And I think that's fine. But I'm saying this is too consequential a relationship for me. My view on the US has not changed because I think the relationship should be divorced from just the leader in the US or in India. And I think it's a relationship that really can stand on its own merits. There is a fundamental recalibration that is necessary on India's side, much more than the US side, of its own relationship with the US. And we can talk a little bit about it later.
Tavleen, I want to bring you in at this point. On all the conversations and the programs you've been part of, you have been saying that despite everything, despite Trump's instability, despite his volatility, America makes for a better natural partner for India's interests in China or Russia because you don't like authoritarians, to quote you. But the way Trump is going at this, how long can India maintain what Ambassador Kumar calls the proverbial stiff upper lip? At some point, India's pride as a nation is going to kick in. At some point, the economic cost is going to kick in and it'll be some of the sectors that are going to be hit by the tariffs.
Look, I don't want to confuse Trump with America. I actually don't see a foreign policy coming from Trump. I actually quoted, it's bullying. He's a bully, and he's surrounded by a lot of people who've not dealt with foreign policy. Navarro being one of them. What was he before? I mean, none of these guys have actually understood that foreign policy is a thing, that you have to make up your mind who you're going to be friends with and who you're not. This is all whimsical. As the ambassador said, what the boss wants that day, and tomorrow he could be, just the other day, he was sitting with Putin in Alaska. That was fine, right? So there's no logic to what he's doing, because for a start, it's meant to be China that is the big competitor with the United States, not us. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a stiff upper lip we need, but a dignified restraint. We should just say, okay, let him. He is, in my view, really, he's harming America much more than he's harming the world. Because, it's not just our prices that are going to go up. What's going to happen in 6 months in America when their prices, he won on inflation, right? Yeah. And prices are not going to come down. They're likely to go up with these tariffs in America. So I think that we should just, we should play all our cards in a discreet sort of way without responding to everything that someone in Trump's inner circle says.
So, Hasini, I want to bring you in. We've had a German daily claim with no independent confirmation from the government that there were 4 times that Trump tried to reach Modi and Modi avoided those calls. Dainik Jagran followed up on that story today and said that they could confirm this. Chidaranand Rajghatta in the Times of India said the reasons may be quite different from what is being suggested by the German newspaper. One, what have you heard about this? Is there any confirmation about this at all? And 2, if it might be true, why might it be true?
Well, Barkha, I'm always a little hesitant to speak about speculation, because if I can confirm something, I will have reported it.
Sure.
But I can say with some confidence that there have been overtures from the Trump administration that haven't been picked up on the Indian side necessarily. It could be because what it came with, the package it came with, was something that was unacceptable for India. For example, we know for a fact the US president wanted Prime Minister Modi to come to Washington on June 17th. For talks. This was 3 weeks before the package, the FTA, was supposed to be delivered. We also know, of course, that the Pakistani army chief was in town at that same time, and there was the possibility that what Trump actually was trying to do was bring the Indian and the Pakistani leadership together so he could claim one more, peacemaking effort like he's done with so many other countries. We also know that a senior US White House official, Ricky Gill, was in Delhi in early August for a National Security Council conference where they were discussing IMEC. Again, not something to do necessarily with trade, but we do know for a fact that official did not really have any very high-powered meetings in the MEA or in the PMO. He was restricted pretty much to the actual conference he was at, and this is something we reported as well. As far as the calls that came from Mr. Trump to, or the calls from the White House to set up a call between Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi go, it wouldn't be inconceivable, simply because we know that whether it's been the Vietnam FTA, whether it's been the Indonesian FTA, whether it's been the EU FTA, whether, so many FTAs, the final mile has been bridged. When it looked like that deal was not going through, the final mile has been bridged by a conversation between Mr. Trump and his counterpart. Sometimes Mr. Trump even announced things that the counterpart had no idea about. But at the end of the day, those deals were forged. So they were able to deal to create those deals, bring down the tariffs with each of these countries. And I cannot imagine that India was an exception, that Mr. Trump would not have tried to speak. But again, as I said, over there, I am simply speculating. I just also wanted to make the point that, some of these signals have not necessarily been read correctly. Ms. Tavleen Singh said quite rightly that Mr. Peter Navarro, who is he? He does not deal with diplomacy. So he can say what he had said over there, which is really unacceptable in India. But one must also accept that we did not read the signs. Peter Navarro wrote the chapter in what was called Project 2025. That kind of set out the course for the Trump administration long before. Mr. Trump even at one point kind of distanced himself from the project. But if you go back, look at Project 2025, you'll find it's called Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. There's a whole chapter written by Peter Navarro in which he speaks about his concerns on what he plans for tariffs. I would say the Trump administration's pretty much followed that, particularly the concerns about India that were in there, as well as in the US trade representatives' own reports. So when it comes to trade, maybe there were things that we didn't necessarily read. When it comes to the Russian oil, I completely agree with everyone so far. There is so much dissonance between what America claims to say it is trying to punish India for with these 25% tariffs, and what the Trump administration itself has done, what the US has done, what they say they're going to do. The fact that China has been importing more oil than India is something even the Democratic Party, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, today criticized Trump about. So the Russian oil does seem like a red herring at present. Maybe it's all essentially about the trade deal. Maybe it's about those calls that didn't work out. Maybe, as you're saying, it goes back to Operation Sindhu. I just do want to say that when we look at this package and we look at how it will be resolved, we're going to have to peel it off little by little, because Trump has more or less made the Russian oil the first step. Even ensured, or the US has now put off the trade negotiations that were to take place on the 29th of this month. So it's going to be that much harder to peel this.
I think that last point first is a really important point, because had Trump managed to bring home a deal from Putin, then maybe that Russian oil issue would have fallen off the table automatically, but that has not happened. And the rest, as you say, we're all guessing. There must be people in government who know. Maybe they also don't fully know, because this is not a leader with consistency or stability. General Bali, in the meantime, there are some very serious security concerns. The security concerns, to my mind, are that we are today engaging with China cautiously, but with the knowledge that our own army deputy chief has said on record that China had an active role in backing Pakistan in Operation Sindoor. Bloomberg is now talking about a secret letter sent by Xi Jinping to President Murmu. Again, we don't have independent confirmation of this. This is what Bloomberg is reporting, that this started in March, this process of China and India inching closer together. But as Ambassador Kumar says, Trump himself will want to cut a deal with the Chinese. And, this leaves India with a lot of vulnerability. I'm wondering how you're seeing it.
I've been retired 9 years, so I wouldn't speak for the deputy chief or for the army's viewpoint.
Sure.
But I do have a different viewpoint altogether. For years and years and decades, we have heard why the Americans are, what their core interests with us are. And one of the things we have heard is that they want a prosperous India so that the Indian markets can open up for US. But their other concerns have been to raise us as a bulwark against the Chinese, as some sort of a regional deterrence against Chinese, and to project us as a democratic counterweight, if I may call it, against authoritarian China. This was, if you go back to the days when the famous multiple rounds of talks between Stroke Talbot and Jaswant Singh took place, leading to the nuclear deal in 2005, even then a lot of people read this subtext that the Americans want us to be a bulwark against China. My point is, why should we be bulwark against anybody on behalf of US after we have seen the kind of transactional people they are? Now, where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is that I think there is probably a need for a thoughtful pivot, a gradual but thoughtful pivot that should push us ourselves to mend our fences with China, to seek a better relationship. China is our neighbor. China is probably the future. And there is no reason why we shouldn't start rethinking about the relationship that we've had with China. On every step, just to criticize China for, they don't want to settle the border question, etc., etc. Now, I'm too small a cog in any wheel to suggest, but I think with China, we could probably think of the Taiwanese model, whereas China has a problem with Taiwan, but it's suspended. They don't discuss that. They're not militarily doing anything about it. I feel we should make that pivot. The Prime Minister's visit to China is a wonderful step. I wish he had stayed back for the grand parade that is taking place 4 days later, but that's not happening. But so that's my view. So if we start moving a little closer to China, in whichever form and shape, then the security concerns that we're talking about probably will also be taken care of.
So that's an interesting thought, General Bali, because we do not have a non-militarized equation with China. After what happened in Gangwan, we have thousands of troops eyeball to eyeball in eastern Ladakh, in the high Himalayas. That said, Navarro had an outburst also on India's inching closeness. Closeness is not the right word. India's cautious rapprochement with China. I'm going to play that out and come right back to the panel. Take a look.
Side with the democracies, you're getting in bed with the authoritarians. China, you've been at quiet war with them for decades. They invaded Aksai Chin and all your territory. These are not your friends, folks, okay? And the Russians, I mean, come on.
With a direct appeal to the listeners and viewers here.
Yes, I love India.
So I want to come to you, Tavleen. I read an interesting comment by you on your X feed today, and you said that maybe the foreign policy mandarins who have had skepticism about not trusting America overtly were right after all. Talk a little bit about that, I think Jaishankar spoke recently about India learning the hard way. I'm summarizing his comments about being too dependent on any one side.
Okay, well, as the oldest person on this panel, I remember the days when, if you said anything pro-American, you were CIA, right? You couldn't even write an article as a junior reporter in the Statesman newspaper. You couldn't say anything without, being shunned by. So the reason why I'm pro-American is because it is a democracy and there will be an election one day and Trump will be ousted one day, for sure. Yeah. Whereas with China, I'm very, very suspicious because, it's all very well to say we should pivot towards China, General Saab. But what about China wanting a little pivot? They hate us. I mean, they've actually backed Pakistan to the extent that Pakistan has become a province of China almost. So, I mean, it's not as if it takes two to tango, as they say, and the Chinese don't want to tango with us. So I actually don't think that we should rely too much on, China. Of course, what we need to do transactionally, we should. But for them to become our friend, I mean, forget it. We can't go back to Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. And also, we cannot abandon this relationship with America. In my view, it is too important. And, we've got to find a way. What are our diplomats doing? Are they falling asleep at the wheel? I mean, they really should be working with the government. So far, by the way, I think one of the flaws in India's relationship with America has been it's been too personalized. It was Modi and Trump. It wasn't the foreign policy establishment coming up with an idea of why we should be doing this. So let's depersonalize it now and look at it more kind of professionally. That's my view.
So, Ambassador Kumar, I want you to come in there. Diplomats have been under severe pressure after Pahalgam, through Operation Sindoor, and now vis-a-vis America. And it's a tough moment in India's sort of strategic security environment. I grant you that. But when Tavleen says, what are our diplomats doing? Was there too much Modi-Trump sort of bromance powering the initial phase of the relationship, so that now that there seems to be some tension at a personal level, the countries don't know how to put the pieces back together? Is that how you see it, or do you see it differently?
No, first of all, on the debate between the general and Ms. Tavleen Singh, I come down on the side of Tavleen Singh. I don't see how we can make up with China. You deal normally with China from a position of strength. And it's very obvious that you are not in a position of strength vis-a-vis China with 50,000 troops in eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. So I agree with Ms. Tavleen Singh on that one. On the other issue of personalization of politics, well, there's always been an asset I have to say, having worked in Paris as ambassador, it was a great asset to have Prime Minister Modi's personal equation with the French President Macron. So I will honestly admit that it has worked in our favor. Now, it so happens now we have a problem, but I am happy to report that the diplomats are not just idling and twiddling their thumbs. I thought there was a meeting of the 2+2 dialogue, admittedly at an additional secretary level, but I have mentioned somewhere that additional secretary from our side, but it was Morrison from the Bethany Morrison from the other side, who works very closely with the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So that meeting was important. There was a meeting on intelligence, and I think our ambassador in Washington was able to get through to the chief of intelligence in the United States. There was also something on nuclear, and I know that both sides are talking about nuclear liability for the sale of small nuclear reactors. There are 26 sectoral dialogues, Barkha, between the two countries. Last count, at least 8 of them are ongoing, and the others are not ruled out. So I would question the assumption that nothing is happening. I think the External Affairs Minister said that, listen, dialogues are happening. So I think the basic relationship is intact, but I wouldn't deny there is a crisis. But I basically think that this relationship is too important to be tied down to one president of the United States who has a beef with India.
Would you advocate? I had Nisha Biswal, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, on my program last evening, and she said nobody can solve this but the two leaders themselves. Do you believe that is the case, or there are some who believe otherwise, or the exact opposite?
No, I believe that, except that the way India would prefer it is that a lot of spade work will have to be done by Jaishankar and his colleagues in the MEA. You don't allow the two principals to meet. That's not our style. It may be the US style, but from India, there would have to be, before the two presidents met, you will remember Rakesh Sood and Strope Talbot and Jaswant Singh meant 10 rounds, for God's sake. That's the kind of thing you need to do now. You cannot ask these two principals to meet. You have to have something like a Strope Talbot, Jaswant Singh dialogue. Ask America to appoint an envoy who knows India. You appoint an envoy, if you like, or you appoint Jaishankar to do it. That is the only way it's going to work. And we just wait for that moment. Otherwise, this crisis will go nowhere. That's just my view, by the way.
Right. So, Suhasini, you have also written against what you call sort of summit-driven diplomacy, and that the perils of that are now being witnessed, as Tavleen has argued. Ambassador Kumar says, look, personal rapport do drive diplomacy, and we've seen it in other spaces before, right? We have seen sometimes two leaders get along, they're able to cut through the clutter, they're able to, power a decision. Is personal rapport a bad thing, or do you just believe that this is a personal rapport that went south?
No, I think it is definitely helps to have a good relationship at the top. Who can argue that? But I do have to say that in both the US's case and China's case, the personal symmetry failed. And I use that word. I know it's a strong word to say. But you cannot have a situation where Prime Minister Modi, as I've said before on your show, has 18 meetings with President Xi Jinping, one-on-one. 2 of those meetings were held without any of the normal note takers. We have no idea what they discussed. And yet we are to understand they came to no understanding over how to resolve the boundary situation. And then when 2020 happened, China transgressed the LAC, Galwan clashes happened, 20 Indian soldiers were killed. There was no explanation of what those personal meetings actually had discussed. Again, with the Trump administration, here you have, again, 2 tenures. So Mr. Trump 1.0, 2.0. Prime Minister Modi goes in there. He's while we're negotiating the first trade deal with the US, he has 2 public rallies with Trump. He more or less endorses Trump for another term in the US. And yet we are to understand that no conversation was had between them to come to an understanding. You need the leaders to discuss the difficult issues. I don't need the leaders to be discussing the issues that we can otherwise resolve. They need to discuss the difficult issues. The difficult issue is very clearly now America wanting access to our agricultural, dairy, and GM markets. The idea that they have met so many times over this particular issue and never once discussed it, to me, I would like a little more clarity about what exactly they discussed then. Because it doesn't seem as if when the relationship goes wrong, that you can see the benefits of that symmetry between them. So that's essentially the point I'm trying to make, Barkha, that you can blame the diplomats and say, where are the diplomats today? But at the end of the day, this was not a relationship driven by the diplomats. This was a relationship driven, if you remember in the past, by tweets going across directly between the two leaders, phone conversations that the officials were not even told about until they were announced on Twitter. So I think it's necessary to put the blame where the blame is. Please explain to us what these conversations were about if they are not able to help us resolve the current scenario. When it comes to the US, when it comes to China, these are global powers. And I do think we have to, somewhere there, go back to the idea that India needs its strategic autonomy. What we have done in the last few years, unfortunately, is given the impression that we are open to being, pushed by one side or the other. We're talking to China today, despite the fact that Chinese troops remain in what is contested territory. We know External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has himself said that the process of demobilization has not yet been completed. And yet we have gone ahead without normalcy at the LAC for talks with China. We went ahead, and I've said this before, in 2018, accepted the US bullying on cutting all our oil from Iran and Venezuela. Did we not give the US the impression that they could do this again? And that's what they're doing today.
So I will get reactions to this, but General Bali, since you are perhaps the sort of sole voice here who says it's a good thing, you've got to talk to China and not just transactionally. I want you to talk about that, right? And I mentioned this, that our troops are eyeball to eyeball, the border disputes are not resolved, it's an ongoing process. What used to be said famously, not a single shot has been fired across the line of actual control, is no longer true after Galban. That Pakistan is a vassal state of China is well established. That Pakistan and Bangladesh are inching closer together is now well established. That China is using its economic might to buy influence in countries in South Asia, where incidentally America has doubled the envoy for India and South Asia. All of this is happening at once. How can we possibly think that China is anything but a Hobson's choice right now?
First of all, I must come across as a very strange voice of a veteran who's talking about building bridges with China, but I want to clarify. I fully respect what the ambassador said and what Tavleen said. My point is not to give up America. My point was not to stop or not to rebuild the relationship or improve relationship. My point was simply this. I am not arguing for a syrupy sentimentalism of 1962 or 1960s of Hindi Chini bye bye. Not at all. I think we have gone far ahead. Our diplomacy is far stronger, far better. I'm talking about pragmatic steps, not mere idealism, to improve relations, to sort of quieten down one of the prongs, one of the borders we have. I'm just talking about that. And the ambassador said right in the beginning that we should think long term. Absolutely, we should think long term. Don't you think improving relationship with China or attempting to improve relationship with China is a great strategic card vis-a-vis America? Don't you think that sort of renders us less vulnerable than we are today? And if we are going to wait for like 70 years to settle the border question and only then we will talk to this or that, I'm afraid it will be very long. I just want to make one final point.
Yeah.
We talked about the sentimentalism of Hindi Chini bye bye. We are similarly indulging in some sentimentalism of democracies. How many beds are the Americans are in the democracies? How are they treating the Europeans? How are they treating Pakistan? How are they treating Putin, for God's sake? For the same oil for which we are being slapped, they're treating Putin with kid gloves. So let us not go too far in this construct. My point is not to give up the American relationship at all. That would be foolish. And I fully agree with the ambassador. There are many sectoral talks going on. They should be built upon. I am only saying, when I use the word pivot, I didn't mean pivot away. I meant also pivot towards.
I actually find your last point very interesting, and I just take quick closing comments from Tavleen and Ambassador Kumar. This sentimentalism of democracies. Tavleen, you say in particular that you relate to America because it's a democracy compared to China and Russia. And General Bali is saying this same democracy will pivot wherever it wants to, irrespective of whether those countries are democracies or not. So, let's stop the virtue signaling on democracy. Countries are going to negotiate from, or should be negotiating from, self-interest and not from so-called values, shared values. I think that shared value diplomacy is over. What would you say to that? Can we unmute Tavleen, please?
Long history of being very friendly with tin pot despots, all over the world. Now they have their own, so, maybe they've got less respect for democracy. But I think that one of the things that we should be doing, I know it's ridiculous to even say it, but I think that we have to try and improve relations with Pakistan if we want to counter China. Somehow or the other, we have to. Because, to tell you the truth.
How? At this point, how? At this point,
I think
at this point, sorry to interrupt. Just a question, just a follow up to you. At this point, when the Director General of ISPR has said on record to The Economist that this time we will attack India from the east, you had Munir making his crazy reported remarks at a private event in Tampa, in the United States of America. What is the context to improve relations with Pakistan right now?
I'll tell you the context. Trump is tilting towards Pakistan again. And that's not good for us. We have now China and America supporting Pakistan against us.
Agreed.
So we need to sort of do something subterranean, maybe, but some way or the other, we've got to sort of sort out one of these things, because China, what it really is worrying to me is Trump's tilt towards Pakistan. He seems to think that Pakistan is now, for a start, on the same level as India, and more important. We've got to somehow defuse that. Remind him about Pakistan's. We're told he's having dinner with General Jihad Central, and he's had dinner twice with him. Right?
Lunch, I think, but that doesn't matter.
Our diplomats need to sort of remind him where Osama was and what the Americans needed to do to get him.
Yeah, I do agree with you that this is why I believe that there's a very serious set of security concerns here, that Trump is being soft on Pakistan. China, of course, is a patron of Pakistan. So, to that extent, we've got to move very delicately. Ambassador Kumar, closing thoughts?
This is a test of the multi-alignment strategy that India has practiced for some time. I think the first time it came under severe stress was when China did what they did in Galwan. And now the US has kind of given us a wake-up call that, listen, you need to keep your options open. So I really see this as back to status quo ante in many ways. Even if you assume that for a while India was getting uncomfortably close to the United States, now nobody can say that anymore. And I still think it's a very consequential partnership with the US. But I think how consequential it can be depends on two sides. It takes two to tango. And I think the fact that we are now trying to talk to China, and by the way, the partnership with China is going to be a difficult one. It's not easy, but the fact that we are making an attempt is what I think is important. I personally think the PM's visit to China, I see it as doing two things, two important objectives. One, maintain peace at the border, despite 50,000 people being in eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. The other is really to maintain what I call peace on the trade front. We have tremendous dependencies on China, whether it is, capital goods coming there or rare earths and anti-active pharmaceutical ingredients for your pharma industry and so on. We don't want those to be affected because as it is, you are under pressure because of the 50% duties. And if China were to turn on the screws, frankly, it would be disastrous. So I think that is what we are trying to do. So a real test for India's foreign policy based on multi-alignment?
We leave it there. I think all I would say right now is that there aren't a bunch of good choices, comfortable choices for India to make. This is perhaps one of the most complicated phases of foreign policy management and challenges before us in several decades. And it calls for both political imagination and diplomatic deftness. It also calls for economic reform at home. And I think the GST reforms are intriguingly timed, but that's for another time. We leave it there. Ambassador Kumar, Suhasini Haider, General Bali, Tavleen Singh, always a pleasure. To our audience, thank you. See you soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.